Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different. I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host Scott Brady, but today you're in the hot seat.
I also wanted to take a brief moment to thank all of you for listening to the Overland Journal podcast. By listening to this podcast and subscribing to the Overland Journal magazine, you're supporting our employee-owned and veteran-owned business. Impartial reviews and in-depth content like this would not be possible without your support. If you enjoy the podcast, I think you'd really love the print magazine as well. And 100% of that subscription price goes back into creating the content like you're listening to right now. And as a special thank you for your loyalty, we're giving 20% off any subscription. And that even includes our special lifetime subscription, which includes numerous lifetime-only benefits. You can go to overlandjournal.com and use the code OverlandPodcast at checkout. Again, that's code OverlandPodcast at checkout, and that'll give you 20% off. I sincerely appreciate your support.
That's because Scott just released a new book called Overlanding 101. It's a compact, deeply practical guide that distills decades of global travel into something you can actually use. So whether you're planning your first trip or have already crossed a few borders, I think this is going to be a great book that people pick up a lot from.
Oh, thank you, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It's been a labor of love. It took about 7 months of my life to get the thing written. A lot of very late nights, probably too many late nights.
Well, it's cool.
Some poor planning on my part.
All of the greats in overlanding now have their book. You finally have yours. You kind of joined Chris Scott. You joined Tom Shepard. I think that this book is phenomenal. It's become my new bedside reading, and a lot of it's familiar to me because I may have learned everything from you already to begin with, but I'm still learning
Sorry about
stuff.
that.
Yeah, well, no, it's good. And the cool thing about this book, what I like is it balances this line between being kind of a reference book, but there's kind of some narrative to it, and a lot of the skills are presented through experience and through travels, which I think is really cool. And I think it's laid out nice, and the photography is A+.
Thank you. Yeah, the designer did a really nice job. And, I think it is important to talk about, like, for example, the vehicle-dependent expedition guide that Tom Shepard has produced. And Jonathan Hansen has been a part of that for the last decade or so. And even before that, we actually brought in the VDEG through Expeditions West. We actually partnered with Tom to buy a bunch of books. So Tom's guide it's truly exceptional, and it's quite a bit bigger than Overlanding 101.
It's very technical.
It is. And so I would call it like a 301 book.
Yeah.
So if they're great compendiums to each other. I think the advantage the Overlanding 101 has is more environments that I've traveled in.
Yeah.
Whereas the advantage that Tom's has is much more based on expeditions, expedition planning, expedition teams. It's just his is extremely detailed, and it is how you plan an expedition around the world. And then Chris Scott's book, which he actually has many of them, but he's got like an Overlander's handbook. And that one, I love the fact that he includes so many more routes in there. So his is great in the sense that, like, I want to go travel Northern Africa.
Yeah.
And you go to that section of the book, and it talks about, like, how to plan for Northern Africa and considerations around Northern Africa. So they are all quite different. My experience pales in comparison to those other two gentlemen. They're incredible mentors and inspirations for me personally. So I feel lucky to be at the 101 level.
I think you're a little bit higher than the 101 level now.
Maybe a few points.
Yeah.
103 level.
Yeah. I think the book, it's not really like a highlight reel of just your trips. Like, it's more of a distilled philosophy that really comes through it. Like, there's this kind of concept of less is more that continues to go throughout the book, which I think is really important. It's not, I like that it's not just about buy this stuff, outfit your vehicle. Like, it's very about, like, it comes off as experienced to me.
Yeah, I mean, I made a real effort in there to be totally brand agnostic. I mean, even the fact that there's a Grenadier on the cover is a nod to being agnostic because there's just not a lot of those out there. It's not a big seller, so it's not like if I stuck a Land Cruiser on the cover, if I stuck a Land Rover on the cover, it would start to become more of like the Land Rover book, and I don't want it to be that. So I like the fact that it's a more obscure vehicle. We considered the G-Wagon on the cover, but Tom ran that so often.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the G-Wagon has a little bit of it can have a weird...
It's got some baggage in North America, so that's something to be aware of. But a couple of the parts of the book that I was so glad that they allowed to go through is I have this one section where I give example of like $120,000 budget, which people will spend $120,000 on a vehicle all day long. So if you bought a brand new Ram and you put a camper in the back of it and you modify it a little bit, you're going to be 120, 130, 140. But the example is buy a 200 series Land Cruiser. You put about $2,000 worth of modifications in it. So basically some better springs and a couple minor things, some storage in the back, maybe a fridge, some camping gear. And then you get to travel for like 2 years on the rest of the money. So, and a KLR is another example, and a Nissan Frontier with a Go Fast camper is another example. So I did really work hard to try to make sure it kept coming back to, you don't need something expensive. There's a great shot in there, a lowest price, and she rode across Africa on a 250 motorcycle. And you can just see like the joy in her face as she's fording some river or whatever in a motorcycle that probably cost her 2,500 pounds.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that the Grenadier made the cover, because that's also the vehicle where you kind of completed your big project, which was becoming the first to properly cross all 7 continents. And that's the vehicle that you finished that endeavor in.
True. And it's also to a nod to Ineos, it's the only car company that exists that makes only overland vehicles.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. So an overlanding, it is very much an overlanding 101 car. Like you can go buy that, like, a stock vehicle like I used. I drove it all the way across Africa. So
what this podcast is about is we're going to kind of use some examples from the book as a guide to, making this a bit of a condensed overlanding 101, so people can get not only an idea of what this book is about, but also hopefully we can, enlighten and teach more people about things. So I think we should start, like, in your mind, like, start with the basics. What is overlanding, Scott Brady?
I still like the definition that Jonathan Hansen and Graham Bell and Graham Jackson came to in probably 2007 or so, which is vehicle-based adventure travel, or vehicle-dependent adventure travel. And I still like that definition a lot because it includes a vehicle. It can be a motorcycle, it can be a 4-wheel drive, it could be a diesel Mercedes, and it includes adventure, which means you're not just doing a road trip. There's some definition around that in the book too. A road trip is kind of like what you do when you're traveling with your family to go see Disneyland, and maybe you see some sights along the way. But the goal is to make it to Disneyland, or the goal is to make it to the family reunion or whatever. So you don't want to say vehicle-based travel because
it's a little too broad.
It's too broad. So you want it to be vehicle-based adventure travel. Adventure travel is a very clearly defined category, and we've talked about this in the podcast before. But I think language is really important. It helps us define things. So it isn't four-wheeling, it isn't camping, it isn't car camping, it isn't road tripping. Those all have their own definitions. Overlanding is very much vehicle-centric adventure travel.
And I think one of the other things you do well in the book is you start to really talk about the history of where this all happened. I guess this all goes back to the Cambridge-Oxford expedition.
Yeah, certainly the most notable. I would say so. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean that inspired an entire nation. And the fact that
post-war.
Yes. Yeah. And the fact that they did that in stock Land Rover
wagons. Were they
wagons.
Series 1s?
They probably were.
Yeah.
I think they were from the 50s, I believe. So they probably were Series 1s. And the fact that David Attenborough was involved in that project, I just love that. I just absolutely adore that man and everything he's tried to do for the world.
Yeah.
So the fact that he was involved with something that I'm so passionate about early in his career is just amazing to me.
So after that, like, what do you think is another like formative vehicle-based expedition?
Well, maybe I'll take just one quick second to back up about 60 years or so. Bertha Benz, which Bertha Benz is a character that people just need to know who she is. When she was still dating Benz, or being courted by Benz, she was the financier. She was like the business mind behind Mercedes-Benz. So she was the one that arranged the financing. So she was very much the money person behind the engineer. And they ended up getting married and all those things happened. But at one point in time, like basically because she owned the car, because she financed the whole thing, she takes this car. It was like in the 1880s, and she drove it. It's the first overland trip. It was like 70 miles, which think of the adventure that would have been.
Yeah.
And she drove it 70
There's no
miles.
infrastructure.
Nothing.
You got to think.
Nothing. And she would have to go into special places to get the right fuel. And it was an incredible thing that she did. And I love the fact that it was kind of like a big screw the world kind of a thing.
Yeah. It would have been a totally different world then.
It would have been. And I love the fact that she just did it. So the pioneer of overlanding is Bertha Benz. So next time you see one of those old, Mercedes diesel sedans going by
every day.
Yeah, so I like that. And I would say after that, the most notable one that comes to mind for me would have been Tom Shepard's crossing of the Sahara from west to east. And that's a very significant expedition. And what makes it even more amazing is this was pre-GPS. So they were using sun compass. They were using sextants. They were
it's
using
like navigating on the ocean.
Yes, exactly. It was like an ocean, and they had very few maps that actually showed anything about the interior. So that was, it was so difficult to find a blank spot in the map, and he did. And it's not to say that humans had never been where he traveled, but like it was very much a terra incognita. Like people just didn't know what it was. So his expedition is one that still like leaves me wide-eyed.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting, like there's all of these people that have kind of laid the foundation. I think in North America, you're a big part of that. But it all goes back to travel, right?
Yeah,
I think
for sure.
We talked about what is overlanding, and to me, it's really just travel on cars, right? With a little bit of grit, a little bit of dirt,
sure,
a little bit.
And you
of
don't even
risk.
have to have that.
Yeah, I mean you don't have to, but I think that there is
makes for a better Instagram reel, but
there's an element of it that you have to put a little bit of work into.
Sure,
it, right?
I like that.
Yeah, that's maybe the difference between that family road trip to Disney World and an overland trip, right?
Yeah.
But how does somebody get out of the door?
Well, I think the most important thing is to start off. You need to know what you don't know, or a few things that you don't know. Yeah. And I really recommend people take whatever car you have, and if you have camping gear in the garage, use the camping gear that you already own, or borrow it from someone. Or worst case scenario, if you don't have any and you don't know anybody that has camping gear, you can rent it. You can rent camping gear from REI and a bunch of other places, and go out and see if you and your companions even enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
Find out what worked. Of like, I really liked that, or actually I really didn't like sleeping on the ground or whatever, and then start to fill in the gap with things. So I believe the best way to start is to go do a very local trip. That way, if something goes wrong, if the stove doesn't work or whatever,
some people
you can
just, I don't want to say aren't cut out for it, but some people this just isn't their thing.
Yeah, totally,
right?
totally. And you don't know until you do it.
And I think it's also important if you're traveling with your partner. Well, both people have to enjoy doing it, because we've all seen those trips where, like, one person enjoys it, she enjoys it, he hates camping, and it doesn't usually go well. So before you spend the money, like you said, rent it.
Totally. I mean, like, there's so many people that are into pickleball right now. I played pickleball and I was like, this isn't for me.
I kind of like it.
No,
but we play.
I get it. I am clearly the outlier.
You'll have to come with Laura and I. We play what's called it's of my own creation. It's called No Rules Pickleball. And
that sounds fun.
And we
so a little bit of anarchy is all I need.
We always try to get right next to the people that are really into pickleball and take it a little too seriously. And then we just throw numbers out. It's like you stepped with your left foot first, 5,000 points. 5,000 points to me. So
okay, I would probably be into that.
That one's kind of fun because it's just about running around and chasing a ball.
Yes.
But this is a great transition, I think, into the fundamentals of overland travel. It is not complex, but it's not simple, and a lot of these things can be daunting. If you're someone that is new to overlanding and they're really inspired by what they see, maybe they've seen some ex-overland videos, or they've seen the myriad. There's hundreds of travelers out there doing some really, really great stuff.
For sure.
But starting can be challenging, right? Like there's a lot to figure out. You have to figure out the driver training, the off-road, because if you're going to be going places that aren't paved and you're going remote, you need to know how to get your vehicle out and how to do it safely. And you have to know all the stuff about camping and vehicle maintenance and border crossings, and there's a lot to it. Or if you're staying in the United States, that's great too. You don't have to figure out the border crossings, but
and there are some really great resources for training. I mean, there's full-blown overland trainers, which is great, like Overland Experts back east comes to mind. I mean, Nina Barlow's one of the best four-wheel drive recovery trainers out there. There's lots of great trainers, but you can also go to something like an Overland Expo, and there are a lot of basic training classes there, or like the new big thing that's coming out in July up in Montana, that is entirely focused on training and experience and connecting with other travel, very much a sense of community. So I think that there's some resources available that are a little less expensive. You can also find a local club or another traveler that's willing to go with you for the weekend and can help you get started with the basics.
As much as overlanding isn't necessarily like four-wheel driving, that's where I got my start, was through a four-wheel drive club.
Totally.
I was like 16, and I had a Discovery 1 Land Rover, not because I was wealthy, but because I couldn't afford a Jeep, and it was like $3,500. But I learned so much from those people. It was the Chicago Land Rover Club.
Cool.
Not a particularly off-roady or overlandy spot, but so many people took me under their wing.
Great example.
Yeah, like wherever you are in the world, there are people in these four-wheel drive clubs or Facebook groups or however it really manifests these days that, there's just some really good stuff out there.
Yeah, and I would say, overlanding in North America is one of my favorites because it kind of removes that compulsion to need to go see that special museum or to go interact with that tribe or whatever. You get to just focus on just getting really remote and oftentimes really challenging terrain. So I find that to be a lot of fun for me. Yeah. So I think North America does have a much more four-wheel drive skills forward kind of overland travel.
We're definitely going to talk about the international stuff later in this podcast, but just to focus a little bit more on kind of domestic overland, it is more oriented towards four-wheel driving.
It is,
because the places that you're going, we have so much expansive open public land that it's inevitable, right?
Yep.
We're not necessarily saying that you're going to be overlanding on the Rubicon or something, but sometimes there's some obstacles that you do come across. So
for sure.
That's where that having that solid foundation of four-wheel drive expertise training is going to pay dividends in the long run.
And it's surprising. Even on a graded gravel road, there can be a tree down and you need to operate your winch, or there could be someone who slid into a ditch and needs to be recovered. Or like you had this happen, you went back into a campsite and it rained through the night and it ended up getting sodden, and you had to do a very complex recovery of a 18,000 pound truck to get out of it. So it's interesting how, I remember even Doug Hackney telling me about the only time he ever used his winch in anger in South America was when he got stuck in a campground. Same situation. It just kept raining for days and days and days, and he went to move, and he had to winch himself out of the camp spot.
Well, I think where having some skills on the 4-wheel drive side translates to international travel is you're able to go more places confidently.
Mm-hmm.
There is a risk to going remote in Bears Ears or wherever.
No doubt.
Pick a spot in the United States. We have so many expansive places, but the consequences are usually pretty low.
Outside of a flash flood, it's pretty minimal.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be able to get some help eventually, right? Where when you're traveling to some of these places, you crossed friggin' Greenland, which is gnarlier than Antarctica because
it was much more difficult.
There's no support infrastructure, but so many of those skills that you develop come from the 4-wheel drive world, right?
True.
But
yeah, in four-wheeling, a good 4-wheel drive trainer will teach you about like being gentle with your inputs.
Yeah.
So that mechanical sympathy, we always want to be preserving the asset. I call it preserving the asset, but the asset is the motorcycle or the 4-wheel drive or the car or whatever. You're preserving that so it can get you through your trip. So you don't want to flog it every day. It's not recreational sport. Yeah. You want to just kind of tone everything back, be a little more gentle, be a little more mindful of the vehicle, do your daily and your weekly checks, which is also in the book, a full checklist. And you can even find it on my, for those that don't want to invest in the book, you can find some of these checklists on scottbrady.com/lists.
Cool.
And there's some of those.
I didn't know you had a website.
I do. I'm sorry. That's how I got my email.
Oh, you have a Scott Brady email?
I feel special. I'm Scott at Scott Brady. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Now everybody's going to email you. Yeah. On the concept of training, medical training is also something that I think, just a basic, at a minimum, like a basic first aid course.
Yes.
I think is really, really essential. When you're remote, things just kind of happen.
They do.
You're eating weird. Let's say you're international. You're eating weird food. You need to know, okay, like maybe I need some Cipro. Maybe I need this. I saw this company that does like full travel kits.
Yeah, I need to get
those. Are
one of those.
really cool.
Yeah, they look really good. And they, you have a conversation with a doctor, they prescribe everything for you. But you brought up such an important point, Matt. Like everybody thinks it's going to be like a broken arm or it's going to be something like that.
It's going to be like an infected cuticle is what it's going to be.
It's going to be a GI issue, or it's going to be a tooth problem. So like when you come on a trip, like make sure you've got antibiotics. Make sure you have antibiotics appropriate for GI, appropriate if you have some kind of other infection, or appropriate if you have like an abscess or a problem with your teeth, and a way to deal with that when you're remote. A lot of times, and this is unfortunate advice, but you hear it all the time, is someone will say like only like buy the medical kit at the level of training that you've received. And I completely disagree with that because there's doctors in the world. Yeah. And a doctor might drive by, or a nurse might drive by, or some other medical professional that can help you. Or if you have Starlink, you can hop on FaceTime.
You can get walked through.
And you can get walked through how to use those things. And the next thing you know, you've just run a nasal pharyngeal and you're a hero. I'm not saying that it's that simple, but the idea is if you don't have it, then that you miss that opportunity. Like even when we did the sailing, we had to have everything to even do minor surgeries. I hoped to God I was never going to have to cut anybody open.
Yeah.
But I wanted to have...
But there's no alternative.
There's no alternative because you're in the middle of nowhere. And that can happen oftentimes with overlanding too. So, don't break the bank on a kit, but have something that's fairly comprehensive that can address most of those major issues, including GI, gastrointestinal, and anything related to dental. You need to be able to address those two things.
Yeah, I think that the emergency stuff is like there's the emergency thing, and then there's the things that are going to happen, which is going to be the GI.
Yeah,
I'm telling you,
super common. And another thing that is quite common too is, a vehicle can catch fire. There's been some very dramatic, videos like that on YouTube, where an overlander's out remote. He's in his Jeep Wrangler, gets a bunch of spin effects or brush and stuff under his Jeep. Catalytic converter catches it on fire. Next thing you know, the the Jeep's burning to the ground. And that's why in the book we talk about a ditch bag. It's something that we use as sailors, but you want to have something like that in your car. It's got your EPIRB, or it's got your InReach device or whatever in there. It's got maybe your first aid kit set in that as well, a little bit of shelter, just so that way if you had to grab one thing. I remember when I was one of the first trips I did up to Tuktoyaktuk, and I was driving on the frozen Mackenzie River.
Oh yeah, because when you did it, they didn't have the all-season.
They didn't have the all-season road, and you'd see one of these ice road truckers coming towards you, and it's literally a bow wake of ice. And what can happen is, where both of your bow wakes, which mine was a heavy Tacoma that didn't stop well on the ice because it had a trailer behind it. If you hit that at the wrong time and it breaks the ice, you can end up going in the water. So again, you're probably not going to die. You're going to be able to get out before the vehicle falls in, descends into the dark. But what do you do when it's minus 40 and all you've got is whatever, t-shirt you had on in the cabin because it was super warm because you have a heater. So run the heater a little bit lower, wear a jacket, you don't have to be extreme about it, but have a jacket on. It's minus 40 outside. Have your bug out bag ready to grab.
There's definitely, I think, times when that's more important when you're driving in a frozen river.
Yeah.
That's probably important when you're doing the stuff that you've done in Antarctica, Greenland, that kind of stuff. Very important. I don't personally have a bug out bag.
Yeah.
Maybe I should.
Yeah.
But the thing I do have.
Or a simple one.
Is I have one of those Garmin InReaches.
Perfect.
But I quite specifically didn't buy the one that pairs to the phone. I bought one that I can type on the screen and it's a GPS.
I like that. Smart.
Because if, I have Starlink. A lot of people have Starlink these days, even on smaller vehicles with the Starlink Mini.
But they're attached to the car.
They're attached to the vehicle and they're attached to the power source. And honestly, when it comes to vehicle failures, electrical failures that cause fires are way, way more common than you think.
For sure.
We're going to get more into that on kind of the on the vehicle itself. So I'm gonna steer the conversation.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. I mean, I think that's a really important point, Matt. Is in the book we do talk about a bug out bag or a ditch bag. Have some version of that.
Yeah.
And it can be something very simple.
It can be appropriate to the adventure.
That's right. Have some water in there. Have a way to communicate. Maybe have a map in there.
Well, actually, we have a
or
bug out
something
bag
simple.
for Dak, our Greyhound.
There you go.
At all times.
So,
it has a soft surface, some water, and
because Dak must survive.
Dak must survive. So navigation is the next thing I want to dive into. We live in this world where you can tell ChatGPT to plan you an overland trip, and then you put it into Gaia or Onyx, and Onyx shows you photos of everything. That stuff's all good for North America.
Yeah.
When you start to travel internationally, you still always have Google Maps. Google Maps is amazing, but
it's ubiquitous now.
You do need to have some fundamentals of navigation.
Sure.
I think that's really, really important. And that's, I don't want to say it's hard to learn, but some people just really suck at navigation.
Yeah, and I struggle a bit in cities.
Yeah.
So when I'm outdoors, I don't have any issues with it, but I can get turned around in cities. Whereas other people are really great in cities, they really have an easy time with it.
Yeah.
So just recognizing that human beings have a natural sense of wayfinding. It's in there.
Yeah.
I mean, humans. Even in some hunter-gatherer,
we're like little homing pigeons, but just not as
good.
Yeah,
they'll do
it's in there.
They'll do 20 miles in a day and come right back to the same spot. Probably not always, but most of the time.
Yeah.
So we do have some natural skills around wayfinding. So there's ways to improve that and to make yourself be a little more effective instead of just staring at the screen. Maybe try to navigate without it. I remember Sinway and I did a really great trip outside of Prescott. And we decided to bring no cell phones. I like that. We brought, and we didn't bring any fancy cameras. We had a couple point and shoots, and no GPS. Mm-hmm. So we had to use the Atlas and Gazetteer, and it wasn't that hard. You just pay attention. You just this is clear. I'm clearly at this turn. I'm going to mark it on the map. I was there at this time. And then you can run the little ruler and it should be about 1.25 miles to the next turn. And like we had the best time, thinking we were going to get lost. We ended up not getting lost. We got probably a little uncertain.
Well, there's
at
so
times,
many
but we never got
Forest
lost.
Service roads around this area that you can really kind of get yourself turned around, and they're not running on a grid system.
That's right.
So I think for navigation, for me, like I'm a map geek, but where I notice people struggle is they don't pay attention and they don't orient themselves.
Oh, sure, that makes sense.
So if you're the one navigating and you're not, I mean, this sounds obvious, and you're not paying attention, and it's like, oh, well, where
I think
where
that's
are
most
we?
of us.
Yeah.
I don't pay attention a lot of the times.
Yeah.
Just the other day, Garmin was trying to route me through Wickenburg to come from Phoenix back to Prescott because they just opened that new bypass route, but it's not in the maps yet.
Oh.
So like it thinks it's closed, and it is. Like the traditional route is closed. So it was going to route me through, and if I had just followed what it was saying, I would have like taken an extra hour to get to the office.
I like to tell people, plan your trip extensively, do the research, know where you're going, but then have the backup, but try to do it without it.
Yeah, I think so, and
because
it's fun.
It's fun, and a lot of times it's like, oh, I make the first left, I make the second right. It can get complicated.
And that's what I love about rallies like the Rebelle.
Oh, yeah.
Where they can't have any GPS. And you talk to these women that have done this incredible adventure, and they were most proud of the fact that they didn't get lost or that they found their way back or whatever. And like if somebody threw me into the Rebelle tomorrow, I would be lost for sure.
We'd be screwed.
Yeah, like I've learned those things, but they have expired. Like I am not either efficient at it or remember.
I've chased the Rebelle Rally a few times. This is actually the 10th anniversary.
I know, I love that.
Of the Rebelle Rally with Emily Miller starting that.
One of the coolest events in the world.
Yeah, and one of the coolest people in the world.
Sure.
I couldn't do it. I mean, I wouldn't have the patience for it. Like, I think that competition is way more technical and way more challenging than a lot of people really actually understand. Like until you've been there and you've kind of followed it, it's no joke.
Yeah, it's awesome. So navigating is an interesting one because it used to be that there was a problem with what was called selective availability. I've written about it in Overland Journal and other places where the U.S. military could like shut off GPS. And it was just only a few years ago, actually, that the government removed that clause. And I didn't actually know that until I was doing research for the book. So selective availability, it doesn't mean that they couldn't.
Yeah.
But, think about the millions of Americans that are traveling around trying to get to the hospital or whatever, and the government shuts off GPS satellites.
Well, because there's no skill set for it.
That's
now.
right. So they actually changed that. So selective availability isn't a problem, but electronics still fail. So have a couple backups, have some redundancy, and bring a paper map along.
Yeah. And there are like non-aligned countries where GPS just doesn't work. Like if you travel in Russia, it's GLONASS. And
it does work.
There?
Yeah, they have their own GPS system, but our GPS works there.
It does it. Interesting. I follow this guy Camperghini. He's driving across like Russia, Kazakhstan, and stuff. GPS doesn't work there. So I don't know if that's a recent thing.
It could be a recent thing, yeah.
Anyway, but I think moving to another fundamental, carrying the tools that you need and the recovery gear that you need. So I'm going to start with tools. It is important to be able to fix your own things, but vehicles are considerably more reliable than they have been. So my toolkit continues to get smaller, I think, over time.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's vehicles like when I travel in the Earth Roamer, I carry a lot of stuff because the consequence is really big if that thing gets stuck somewhere, from a failure. But I find that with tools, people often bring too much. And also with recovery gear, they bring too much. It's really easy. I mean, I made a living selling recovery gear, but I like to think I was on the more minimalist side of that. I do see some people that it's like, they have the back of their Jeep and half of it is recovery gear that they don't know how to use. It's like the medical kit, right? That the equipment is only as good as the training.
Yeah, and oftentimes what happens is as people add new pieces, like maybe they decide, I'm going to get soft shackles.
Yeah.
Then they don't pare down their number of screw pin D-shackles.
Yeah.
So continue, go through your kit once a year. Just spread it out in the garage. Make sure that everything's okay. Nothing's been damaged. Nothing's been soaked by oil and breaking down the polyester or whatever. Do a physical examination, and you may find oh shoot, this is underrated for my new vehicle, or this is I just bought a Samurai, which by the way, there's a tin top Samurai downtown Prescott right now that I want to make a bad financial decision around.
You can get the newer ones, like you and Charlie drove the
I
Silk Road in.
I know, but it's so
there's
so
also
tempting.
a Pajero Mini or Micro.
Yeah, those are sweet.
Oh, so cool. So cool.
Yeah, so you just make sure that the recovery gear is appropriate to the vehicle and go through and check it out. And same with the tools. If you're driving a vehicle that is all metric, maybe don't bring all the SAE along with it.
That's the cool thing I'm learning. I'm building the toolkit now for the Grenadier, and almost everything is Torx, which means I need very minimal tools.
Sure.
Which is really cool.
Unless it's on the chassis, you're right. Most of it's Torx unless it's on the chassis.
Yeah. So, when you take a good four-wheel drive course, you're going to learn a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of information on vehicle-based recovery. For me, the biggest thing is safety, safety, safety. Your vehicle getting stuck is one thing. Causing harm to yourself because you're trying to get your vehicle unstuck is a risk.
And usually that's, to your point, people are just in a rush. They feel they're nervous, they feel embarrassed because they got stuck, or they're afraid that they're going to be late to something. It's called an accident. An accident happened. You got stuck. It wasn't intentional. It happens. But please slow down. That's when you see the vehicle get, it's tipped onto its side, and they tip it back over on all four wheels, but nobody thought to put the parking brake on or to
it's in neutral.
or to put it into first gear or whatever. They never thought about that. And then the vehicle rolls down the hill and sometimes brings the other vehicle with it. So just really going through methodically, coming up with a plan, voicing the plan to others so everybody knows that they're on the same page.
So we're going to start talking about more of the vehicle stuff now. I think the biggest thing, if you're gonna pay attention to one thing for this whole kind of segment that we're going into, it's choosing the right vehicle, because there's so many people that they just start with the wrong machine.
Very true. They start with the wrong machine, or they're not willing to compromise to keep that vehicle being a suitable choice. So if you have a mid-sized truck that has maybe an 800 or 900 pound payload, and you really want to put a camper in it, it starts to be the wrong vehicle for the job.
Yeah.
So you're way better off selling that vehicle while it's still worth a ton of money because it's not been heavily modified. It's not now unique to you. Selling that vehicle and buy a 3/4 ton or a 1 ton full size, and then getting an appropriate camper. There are mid sizes that can carry campers, or there's really light campers. So it's about having the right tool for the job. For international travel, wagons tend to still be the best tool for the job. Most people tend to avoid campers. Most people tend to avoid trailers. I'm not saying that you can't do it with either one, but think of every toll road, you're now paying for an additional axle.
Yeah.
It's more difficult to ship the vehicle. When you go down the wrong way in an unfamiliar city and you're in a one-way street going the wrong way and you're now trying to back up either
about being stressed.
Big camper or a trailer trying to back up. Or like an example in the book, which is funny because it doesn't happen to most people, but I was charged by an elephant. Like if I had a trailer behind the the G-Wagon, it would have been a real problem. So being able to reverse efficiently out of a situation is always a good idea. So making sure that you have the right Whereas having a trailer in North America can actually be a great solution.
Yeah, you can leave it at camp. You can go do some more recreational forward
Or Australia is
driving.
another great example.
Yeah.
There are places where a trailer is a great idea, or a truck camper is a great idea.
You know, Matt Pryor is doing his trip, and he has a Grenadier with a Patriot.
Super small trailer, which is I think good. So
but
suitable to the car.
That with his wife's with him and his 2 young kids are with him. I'm like, wow, like that the scenario of the wrong way down the wrong road in an old city.
Yeah. Could you imagine?
Oh,
yeah, that's
man.
tough. I mean, fortunately, he's a very experienced traveler, so I think that helps a lot. But yeah, definitely buying the right vehicle for the job, or just accepting the limitations of the vehicle you have and enjoy it. Yeah. Don't spend the money. I mean, really, the number of people who have done incredible journeys in 2-wheel drive diesel Mercedes sedans. I mean, it's like it's if you go to any of those countries, you go to Kazakhstan, you go to Tajikistan, they're all driving around in 2-wheel drive Mercedes sedans. You don't need some crazy expensive overland vehicle to do that. Like, of course, if you have the resources, then enjoy it. It's not to shame anyone for spending a ton of money on the car if they've got the resources. But if the goal is to travel, make sure you can fund the trip, as opposed to just having a really cool car that now sits in the driveway.
You need something that has, I'm not going to say like, you don't need the capability of a Wrangler Rubicon most times. It's nice to have locking differentials and all of that kind of stuff. But what you really need is you need a robust chassis, a robust vehicle that is reliable. And like you said, that's not always a truck or an SUV or a station wagon. Sometimes by our version of station wagon, it is a Mercedes E-Class station wagon. They're still very durable, serviceable vehicles.
And they go completely under the radar. Nobody will even know you're there.
Yeah. And I think
so they have advantages.
There's something cool about that. I think, to kind of continue preparing the vehicle, and I'm not going to talk about the modifications to the vehicle, but this concept of light bars before lockers, or that kind of thing. Oftentimes it's like light bars before tie rod ends is actually what really matters, is making sure that vehicle is serviced beforehand. I was recently talking to a traveler on the Pan Am, and they had to do their rear brakes on their Jeep, and they had to get tires. They kind of knew, okay, maybe I should have set off on this. They ended up spending more money on the tires. They ended up spending more money on the brakes. Like, make sure that the maintenance, if you're doing the Pan American Highway and you're going to do 25,000 miles, well, consider what's going to have to be done at 24,000 miles.
Yeah.
If your brakes are already kind of, it's going to be cheaper to do at home and way easier.
Way cheaper. And then just on the modification side of it, if you're going to be traveling the Pan American, find out what size tire is going to be typically fitted to a Hilux, to a Prado, which is going to be a 265 70 R17 or a 265 75 R16. So pick one of the two, and you're going to be able to find tires in any country.
And
in Central America,
crazy and expensive.
They won't be, and you'll even be able to find less expensive versions or whatever. But if you want that, like I happen to like really exotic tire sizes, because like I want that
of my Grenadier right
now.
Same.
Same.
This weird tire size.
Mine's a 285 75 R17, super obscure size. Yours is a little better because it's a commercial truck size, but it's a little bit better. But for the most part, like, you don't want some crazy exotic tire size, or you got to carry a bunch of extra spares, or you got to be prepared to air freight some stuff in. So like, if you launch off on your trip and you've got 265 75 16s on there, you're going to be able to find tires anywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
It all comes back to simple vehicles, right?
Yeah, simple vehicles and simple modifications for sure.
So all of these modifications are great. I'm going to go back to the four-wheel drive training aspect before we go into the 10 commandments of overland vehicle modification. You have to know how to do this stuff, right? Like a well-trained driver in a near stock four-wheel drive will almost always outperform a untrained driver in a highly modified four-wheel drive.
Absolutely.
So,
the places I've seen Dave Harrington take stock trucks is, eye-dropping. So
it's, your vehicle can go more places than you think it can.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Generally, the simpler you keep it, the better. So we're going to go into our 10 commandments here.
We did a fun podcast at one point.
I think this all came from the podcast, didn't it?
It did. Yeah, definitely a hybrid.
So this is a good transition. Number 1, complexity is the enemy. Simplicity equals reliability. Number 2, weight is also the enemy. Travel light to go further and brake less. 3, ensure peak suspension performance. Prioritize ride quality and control over height. And I'm gonna do these kind of 3 at a time.
I like that.
So the less complex a vehicle is, from an aftermarket perspective, in my experience, I think the more reliable it will usually be. And a lot of it comes back to the electronics. But it's weight that is the biggest thing, I think.
Yeah, for long-term. So complexity affects reliability. Weight affects durability. So the more complex we make the vehicle, the more stuff we bolt to it, or electronics, to your point, you're going to have a greater chance that you're going to throw an engine code, or you're going to have some electrical issue, or it's going to create like putting a fancy air intake on there, or like, hey, I'm going to chip my car, or I'm going to put in a throttle
sensitivity
throttle
booster.
Something or other. And when that thing packs up, when you're trying to cross a 4-lane road in Guatemala, and now you have no throttle, which the throttle would never fail on a Toyota in any other circumstance, unless you're driving a Prius down the freeway in Southern California. But for the most part, like a Tacoma is never going to not go when you want it to go, unless you do something crazy like that to it. So complexity directly affects reliability.
And then with suspension too, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but people always feel like there's a lot of marketing around suspension. Like
sure.
Like good suspension's great for a lot of technical terrain, going fast, that kind of stuff. But when you have your house in your car, you can only go as fast as as you can go before a coffee cup hits you in the head or something.
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
It's a different style of travel.
And you want to get to the other end. You want to make it to the end of the continent or whatever. And we talked with Dave Harriton about this too, but now you've upgraded the suspension, but maybe the frame's not up to the task, or maybe the brakes aren't up to the tasks, or those tie rod ends you talked about. Now they're going to buckle under a big impact.
I find that vehicles with independent suspension are maybe the most finicky, particularly on the front. Beam axles, solid axles are fairly easy to lift. You run into some geometry issues, but you run into larger geometry issues on an independent suspension vehicle in the front.
So true. Especially you start running out of droop travel.
You're sacrificing ride height for droop travel. Maybe you're gaining some more up travel, but then usually you're using a bump stop to limit up travel to fit a larger tire.
Yep.
And then you're running your CV axles at more extreme angles.
Yep.
So Toyota guys are constantly blowing those, even with 2-inch lifts. And then you have these uniballs that you usually need to get everything kind of back in line and get more travel.
Or diff drops, and then the diff drop puts additional stress on the front prop shaft. Those are all factors. And the cool thing is every vehicle has an operating range.
Yeah.
So find out what the operating range is for your vehicle. You never want to have less than 72 millimeters of droop travel in an IFS, because you're gonna lose that critical component of rebound control in the front end. You're going to be bouncing off of those jounces or those limit straps. So you really want to be mindful of that.
So our next 3: keep the engine stock. Power comes at the cost of reliability. Isolate and minimize all electrical modifications. Avoid parasitic drains and diagnostic headaches. And use quality tires with an appropriate tread pattern, because tires are your first recovery tool. So I guess we talked about the engine thing a little bit,
for
right?
sure.
I think chips are the biggest thing. Like, it's so tempting to want to get a little extra out of the engine, but
Yeah, we can get 500 horsepower out of these Grenadier motors if we want to. It's so tempting.
I actually read an interesting thing on that engine, the B58 that's in the Grenadier. on how it shares the block and the bottom end with the diesel engine. And yeah, you can get crazy horsepower out of them.
Yeah.
Because, it's in the Supra as well.
It is. And that's
And-
300 and something horsepower in the
But
Supra.
people they're tuning them to 700, to whatever you want. It's
Yeah.
a closed deck block. It's crazy. Keep the engine stock. Like I'm sitting here and I'm even thinking like, oh man, I could have like the G63 of Grenadiers. No, don't do it. It's a bad idea. Electrical modifications are something that we feel quite strongly about.
And mostly because I've screwed that up so badly. Like
Yeah.
I've done really poor jobs on electronics, and then it gets frustrating. You're on your trip, and that expensive thing you bought to monitor your who's a what's it, and it stops
Yeah.
working, and then the Bluetooth won't pair, and you're super frustrated. And the next thing you know, your Starlink isn't working, and the app whatever. It ends up being so frustrating when all that stuff stops working. So keep it simple, and then like that modification you just did to your Grenadier with like looking at your wiring, I was like, that is impressive.
It only took modifying 20 vehicles over 15 years
Yeah.
to figure out that.
But that was awesome. Like I was
Well,
like,
'cause
holy cow, that is sweet.
I tied into the factory, into a factory fuse. I mean, it's literally, there's a factory terminal fuse that I'm using. I didn't even change that, right? But all the wiring is sheathed. All the wiring is captured with like OE style kind of connectors.
Yep.
It's with wiring, I find it's always like the abrasion, or it's things that aren't really secured, or they're run in a weird place and then they arc out.
Or the connections not done properly, not crimped properly, not heat shrink, not
something,
Yeah.
right? The simpler you can keep it, unless you have a very good automotive electrician, the simpler you can keep your vehicle, the better. And now with these, the Goal Zero, Jackery, EcoFlow, whatever,
Yeah,
these
yeah.
battery bank type things,
they're great.
I think for a lot of people, that's really all that they need.
That's what I use in the Scout. It's
Yeah.
perfect.
Tires are a big thing with an appropriate tread pattern. You do not really need a mud terrain tire unless you're going to places. I think in your book you put like a very specific figure for rain amounts, which I thought was really cool. It was kind of scientific, but if you're going to Guatemala and you want to go to some ruin that you have a buddy that's going to take you to, or something, like we're inventing this mythical situation of
It happens.
of mudding,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 2009, we went to Holmol, which is a super remote Mayan
Yeah.
destination. We needed mud tires for that.
There's a place for them. These hybrid tires that are somewhere between an all-terrain and a mud terrain is very fascinating to me.
I'm liking them more and more.
That's what I went with on the Grenadier.
Sweet.
I did that HD terrain from BFG. Not
I would like to
sponsored.
see some.
I paid for them,
I would like
but
to see some more siping out of that tire, but
yeah,
maybe we'll
if
see.
there was an all-terrain version of it, it would be the go.
Yeah.
I still think
I like it.
just like a regular all-terrain is really all that you need. And leave with new tires.
Mhm.
Like if you're at 50% and you're driving around the world, you don't know when you're coming back, it's going to be cheaper and easier here.
And remember, you can get money for used tires. People are looking for 50, 60% tread life tires, in your local Craigslist or whatever.
So I'm going to go through the next three. Avoid roof loads. Lower center of gravity equals better performance and safety. Number 8, don't forget self-recovery. Build around traction boards, a shovel, and your best judgment. 9, secure the load. Rattles break gear, and unsecured loads can kill. 10, prioritize quality and design over quantity. Every item should earn its place on the vehicle. That's actually 4, but we'll go from there. The roof loads is an interesting thing. I think
Roof racks are fine. Roof loads should be avoided.
Yeah, I like having a roof rack.
Yeah, and explain to the listener why you and I have always felt like a roof rack is a good idea, but roof loads are less desirable.
I like to have a roof rack, but I like to leave it largely empty.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Firewood can go on there for a short distance. A kayak, the buddy that flies in that needs a place to put his bag. It's this kind of reserve capacity that you have.
Yeah,
which
or
is
you're
really
traveling with
nice.
another couple and their vehicle breaks down. You can move the gear up on the rack. You can fit them in the back seats.
It's additional utility because
That's right.
oftentimes in an overland vehicle, you're not like losing storage, but you're predetermining the storage, right? You have a certain amount of things that have to fit inside, and it leaves very little room on the inside of the vehicle, right?
Oftentimes.
You know,
Parkinson's law.
the thing that is interesting with roof tents, there's really nothing wrong with a roof tent. I think they're a really great option for a lot of people, but they'll put a 120-pound roof rack, and then they'll put the roof tent on top of the roof rack when they could just use crossbars.
Yeah.
Especially with a lot of these roof tents that have accessory ports and things,
Yeah.
accessory tracks. I think it's just the more weight you keep low and the more you keep off of your roof, just the happier you're going to be. I mean, when the little kid pulls, it's the driver's
the
ed
ball
thing.
coming
It's
into
the
the-
ball coming, and you've got to swerve.
Yeah.
Well, the kid's going to look like, oh, why'd that car flip over?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and most like a 4Runner has a 140-pound roof load rating maximum.
Yeah.
The Grenadier's high, the Defender's got 300-pound roof
The
load rating.
Defender's crazy.
Yeah, it's really good. 200 series Land Cruiser, 300 series Land Cruiser has over 200 pounds of roof load rating, but most of the time you can't really put that much weight up top.
Yeah. Being able to get yourself out of a sticky situation, so this next thing of self-recovery is also really important, I think. I like having a winch. You know, there's, I'm a big fan of traction boards, but...
Yeah, but let's talk about that for a second. If you didn't, because a winch can be expensive and requires, training.
Yeah.
So, and it adds weight to the front of the vehicle and everything. Takes
and
away
usually
payload.
requires a bumper.
Takes away payload. So, if someone was to build a recovery kit in your mind where they didn't have a winch, what would be some of the things that you'd have them add?
Oh, man. Well, that's actually how I'm to use the Grenadier that I'm building right now as maybe the guide for this. I have pared my recovery gear back considerably. I do not have a winch. I have, a set of good traction boards. They're Max Tracks. I have an additional set I can throw on. I usually, right now, running around town, I only carry a pair of them. I have a 2-meter snatch strap, and then I've got a winch line extension because that's a really small, compact. That can be a tow strap, that can be a static recovery strap, that can be a winch extension. It serves more than one purpose. And then I have, I think, 3 or 4 shackles in there. And that's actually all I have right now, because what I'm building that vehicle for, between the lockers and everything else, that can, I can pull someone else out. If somebody drives by, I have the tools needed to use their vehicle with my equipment to extricate myself. And most times I find that the recovery boards, traction boards, just kind of do it for me. Like if I was...
Yeah, air down first. If that doesn't work, traction boards. If that doesn't work, dig some more.
Yeah, if I was doing this Guatemala trip, maybe I would want a winch.
Yeah.
Right? But then, because you have trees to winch from, you don't always have trees and things to winch from. I think you go down this pathway very quickly with recovery gear of it's better to have it than to not have it almost always. But then I look back and I'm like, man, like only on very specific trips have I ever pulled winch cable.
Mm-hmm.
Like with the Earth Roamer, I like to have it because it just might sink.
Well, and who's going to pull you out? The local that comes by in a Hilux, there's no chance.
No.
They may try to be supportive, but like they're going to end up damaging their truck or ripping something off or whatever. So yeah, you kind of have some responsibility with an Earth Roamer to have a proper way to extricate.
But you know this. I mean, like the majority of international travel, you're really not tending to seek out these trails that would be considered recreational 4-wheel driving because it's like a marathon, not a sprint, right?
For sure.
So you're talking about getting yourself unstuck if think you're in southern Utah even and you're on one of these roads. It's that I think it's bentonite clay.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Like even Sinway got like majorly stuck and he's got lockers and everything. I think he has a winch too. Could not get his truck unstuck. You're going to run into situations like that, but a little prior planning, a little knowing when to say I'm not going to go down that road, which Sinway Xavier's Substack, he did a really good.
That's a great one.
Did a good story on just like knowing when to turn around.
Yeah, I mean, I had a winch in the Grenadier for crossing Africa, and I mean, I used it once a week to test it, and that was it. So I never, but there were several times when I was close, like where I could have gotten stuck, and I was glad that I had it.
I think that
like in Lion Country or something like that. So
I'll probably add a winch to mine eventually, but I just, maybe I need it because then you have more stuff that you have to carry with to support it. But
no, you're not wrong. And if like the trip that you're looking at doing, you probably don't need it. It would just add weight and takes away payload.
Takes away payload, takes away fuel economy. But securing the load is really simple. Like have a place for the thing that you're carrying with you. Like don't leave the snatch block on top of your drawers or in the back seat. Because when you hit the brakes, it's going to hit your head and it's going to be not fun. But the same goes for cases. And then, I often find that with like roof tents, people will kind of haphazardly attach them. Make sure that mounting system is really good.
And check it.
Yeah.
Check it with some regularity to make sure that, those little nuts are not falling off the bottom of it. And then, bungee cords should only be used under compressible loads. So like if you're bungeeing down some pillows, some bedding, sleeping bag, things like that, bungee cords are appropriate. But other than that, you want to be using a ratcheting strap to put it under a lot of tension so that it can't move around.
And ratchet straps are cheap. I mean,
they are cheap.
Like I like using the Max custom tie downs ones. They're made in the U.S. They're good. Whatever. I'll have them for a long time. You can get really cheap.
$12 for a couple ratchet straps.
Most of them are a 500-pound working load. You're probably not going to get anywhere near that. So the last one is prioritize quality and design over quantity. Every item should earn its place in the vehicle. You had a quote about,
Yeah, it's an extupore quote that I, changed to make it appropriate for overlanding. But it's basically says that the vehicle isn't perfect when you've added the last thing to it. The vehicle is perfect when you've taken the last thing away. And I think we all go through that U-shaped process where, you start off very simple because you don't have any money or you don't know what you need. So you start off really simple and then you go up this U-curve and you end up like at peak overlanding where you got all of the things and
everything
and all your credit cards are maxed out. And then you come back down the other side of the curve and you end up taking a trip with very little because you've gained a lot of experience along the way. You know what you need, you know what you don't. You know that it's frustrating to rifle through the drawers or, the vehicle handles poorly or you get terrible fuel economy. So you start to get much more simple. So, be very critical about anything that you put into your car. I mean, it is important for the listener to hear, but like even Matt and I continue to learn these things.
Yeah.
So like I've watched you do that with your Grenadier and you deliberate. Like you have the resources to kind of send this thing, to Tony up in Salt Lake and have him like doll it up with all the coolest kit. But you're choosing to do it yourself so you can service it when you're in the middle of the nowhere, and you're choosing to do a very minimal amount of modifications because you want to be intentional about it. We just had a podcast on intentional modifications. So I think that's what you're doing is a great example of that. I'm doing that with the 1150 GSA that I bought from you. Yeah. Very minimal modifications, very intentional.
Well, and that's a good example because the Grenadier is expensive, right? And I think it's important that these are the vehicles that Scott and I use and we're surrounded by, but this applies to the $3,500 1150 GS Adventure, right? This applies to a third gen 4Runner that you buy. They will all benefit from these things, right? It doesn't. Overlanding is not meant to be a display of your wealth or your taste or anything. It's meant to be a deeply personal experience, and don't let the stuff get in the way.
But you know what? There's nothing that signals harder than the guy that's got the stock vehicle that pulls into the same spot that you just with all of the Farkle and gadgets
Yeah.
and widgets and stuff like that.
I mean, the Grenadier I have still has the stuff, right? It just that vehicle was made to
Yeah, it's made for
incorporate
this.
these
Yeah,
things.
It's made for that.
But I agree. Like, there's always like the kind of dusty archaeologist dude that you see in
Totally.
southeast Utah, and yeah, they're like always in third gen Forerunners.
Yeah.
With like 500,000 miles on them, and 400,000 miles of them are on dirt.
Yeah.
Like,
And they basically, you look at them,
that's
they have a
cool.
good set of tires on them.
Yeah.
They usually have very little body damage because they're mindful of how they drive them.
Yeah.
And they just have a ton of experience. So it's like, for them, it's easy.
So let's get into our last thing here, the journey. So the goal with this last kind of top series of topics is to help you plan, execute, and then fund real travel, whether that's domestic or international travel. You're not always on a big trip, so there's a lot of stuff to do in the United States. So,
Some of the short ones are my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking just like going camping in
Yeah.
Prescott.
Yeah.
Like, we live in the middle of nowhere-ish. It's growing, but well, the great thing about that is we can drive 15 or 20 minutes and still have that
we're camping
kind
in-
of experience.
yeah, beautiful spot.
Choosing routes is probably the hardest part of planning the trip, and then also learning to plan flexible itineraries, right?
Yeah.
You've planned some big stuff, like big complicated things, but what are your tips for somebody? God, I feel like I keep saying the Pan Am, but it's just such a popular and convenient
That or
trip.
Alaska.
or Alaska
some
or
good
whatever.
examples.
Like,
Baja.
when you set out to really choose a route, like what's your first step?
Well, the first step has to be having a conversation with your travel companions. And that's something, again, it's in the book. Most of the stuff that's in the book is because I screwed it up. I failed, or I made a mistake, or I created an unnecessary issue, and I learned from it. So I believe that the first thing that you got to do is sit down with your travel companions. If you're traveling with your family, what does your daughter want to experience on a trip to Baja California?
Yeah.
And you might find out her eyes, if you ask her, her eyes might light up and she says, I've always wanted to see the whales.
Yeah.
And now now you get to be the hero, and and it's cool to get there. Like, it's a cool route to get out to where the Scammons Lagoon.
South
and
of Huero Negro.
yeah, it's super cool. And now she gets to experience that. And your son may say, Dad, I've always wanted to stand up paddleboard, or I've always wanted to learn. I'd love to drive if we could on a dirt road or whatever. And then ask your partner, like, what would you most enjoy? And it's like, I've always wanted to go to Todo Santos, and there's this amazing Italian restaurant, and there's this apothecary bar I've always wanted to go to. Or maybe she's always wanted to do the Baja 1000, so you time it with the 1000. You get to see the race cars come by. So have those conversations with your family. Find out what helps keep them stay comfortable. Instead of telling your kids what to pack, ask them what makes them feel comfortable. You might find out that they don't care about the clothes they wear, but they really care about their pillow.
Yeah.
So if you don't ask them that, a lot of times they won't say it. So bring the right pillow, and so ask those questions. There's a list of questions in the book that I think is helpful for that. But ask those questions of your travel companions, and ask those questions of yourself.
Yeah.
It is way too easy in a world of Instagram to try to replicate an experience that someone else has had, and they probably are replicating something that they saw someone else have. So find out what the experience is that you want. When you go down there, like you and I riff on this kind of stuff all the time, like the things that we want to be able to experience when we go to these places.
Yeah.
And so ask that question of yourself, and you may be like, you know what, I would love to have a week on the beach, and then plan for that.
I think this is where the flexibility really comes in, right? Is I find from the people I've interviewed and talked to over the years that the ones that are the happiest have the most flexible itinerary. Now that generally correlates to an availability of time, right? Like sometimes you just don't have unlimited time. Like
Sure,
that is
that's
like
fair.
the most valuable and expensive thing on the planet, right? I have just learned,
Yeah, ask Warren Buffett how much he'd give you for another 100 years. He'd give
Yeah.
you all of it.
yeah,
He'd give you
another, probably another 5.
Yeah.
Sorry, respectfully to him, he's an interesting guy. I always try to do too much. I tend to plan too much. I try to drive too much. I'm trying to pack as much into every moment on the trip as I possibly can. And slowing down, the trips where I slow down and I do the least are generally the ones that are the best.
Yeah, and I'm still learning that, Matt. And
I think everybody is.
And
Well, you come from this, like daily life in America is busy,
Yeah.
right? You can fill every second of your life with something, whether that's, you used to just like sit and wait for something and you kind of look around. Well, now
Yeah.
that time is filled with Instagram or TikTok or whatever, right? So that's what you're programmed to do.
yeah.
It's
And Matt, I spent the first third of my career feeling like an imposter,
Yeah.
like imposter syndrome. I felt like like these luminaries of the space, like I felt like I didn't know enough, and I was in this position that I felt like I had to demonstrate that. But I never backed off the throttle. So like I pushed so hard in the beginning, and that was probably enough. But I never stopped doing that until recently because I've been a little bit more aware of it. But here's the thing about flexibility. You're either you choose to be flexible or you're going to have to be flexible, because the one thing that is guaranteed with adventure travel is the unexpected. So the people who suffer so greatly are the ones that somehow expect the world and serendipity
It
and
bends
other
to
people
them.
to bend to them. And that is not how it works. Making a decision to be an overlander, the first thing that you're deciding to do is to be flexible,
yeah.
is to be willing to allow for adventure to unfold and overcome those challenges. That's where all the great stories come from. That's where all the great memories come from, is like overcoming those challenges. So flexibility is going to be required of you whether you do it willingly or not.
Yeah. Well, the next topic requires flexibility, and that's vehicle logistics. So part of planning one of these trips, you're going to have to ship your vehicle.
Yeah.
And the container ship that has thousands of other containers does not care about your journey.
Yeah.
The logistics company does not care about your journey. They have thousands of other customers
That's right.
that are much larger than you. Learning to be flexible with logistics and just even your personal travel, you're shipping to Europe, you're shipping to Africa, wherever you're going, just like be flexible. Like I think it's important when you're on this trip, this is your time.
And
make
invest
the
in a
best of
good agent. I
Yeah.
mean, like it will always be worth the investment, because if you get delayed 4 or 5 days, those hotel fees and the food that you had to pay for and the taxis back and forth to the port, you're going to more than cover the cost of the agent. So, like there's Panama Passage, and there's not Panama Passage anymore. What is it now?
The Overland Embassy.
The Overland Embassy.
Well, they do this all day long.
Exactly.
Right?
And they have good contacts. They know the game.
IVSS is another good one. Cars is another.
Yeah, Cars is
another
that's who
good
I've
one.
used. I've used
Cars.
a lot of Cars.
Cars. If you think your overland vehicle is expensive, Cars ships things like, one of one Ferraris all the time. That's a fascinating company. But just learn to be flexible and plan these things out. And I will tell you that they always cost more than you think that they will. Financing your adventure is an interesting one.
Yeah.
We're not financial advisors, and you shouldn't really listen to us on this.
Yeah, we're not playing one on the internet.
We're not playing one on the internet. But these trips do take, they take money, right? There's just no way around that. You have to buy the vehicle, and then you also have to live while you're not working and bringing in an income. So save.
Yeah,
that's kind of
it's the best way to it's the best way to travel. The best way to travel is to save for it. The least effective way to travel is to try to get sponsored to do it. There's about 5 people that have made that work on any scale. And there's about 5,000 people who have gone into a great deal of credit card debt and not made it work. So I think that like the sponsorship route is really tough. Like it's really, really tough.
Yeah. You also end up, how do you say it? There's definitely people that have done it, like you said. But there's a lot of people doing this now. Like I talk to a lot of people that kind of ask me about the sponsorship stuff, like having previously been on that side of the industry.
Yeah, you sponsored people.
Yeah,
at Maxtrax.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's easy to get some free product or whatever, but there's always this concept that even I would fall into. It's like, why am I sponsoring your vacation?
Yeah. That's the challenge with most of this is it's a plea to pay for my vacation, and it comes across as that. So
the people that we would work with, when we were doing it, there was always an element of a business transaction that was happening behind it. It's amazing that you're doing this great adventure, but don't forget that the adventure's for you, right? And that goes 2 ways. One, don't compromise your trip just to get some free stuff or a little bit of money or this or whatever. You'll find that oftentimes saving and actually shutting off and being able to enjoy it is almost, from everyone I've talked to, I mean, we've talked to thousands of people that have done these trips. That's always the preferable way. But
it takes a ton of time to get sponsorship. Just do that. Like ask your boss if you can work some overtime or pick up another job on Saturdays and save the money. And then you get the trip gets to be all about you. You get to just enjoy yourself.
Exactly. The people that we did work with, to go back to that, they always had like I said, it was always a business relationship in that, maybe we needed photos of a certain new product or whatever, but they had a skill that we needed. So then we would work with them. Like, for example, we sponsored X Overland. That wasn't just for the influence. That was because we got photos and video and asset.
And they're professional travelers.
And they're professionals, right? A lot of people buy their first camera. They're doing this amazing trip. They're very excited. Maybe they don't know that, and this isn't to discredit, but maybe they don't know that people are doing this all the time.
Yeah.
Right. It's a lot more common than you would think.
It's just a huge lift to try to pay for an overland trip by being an overlander. It's a huge lift.
And you end up working with maybe the people you don't want to, and then your car looks like a NASCAR sometimes. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's coming from a position of privilege, but
well, you've been there. You went through that. You've experienced all of it, Matt, and you realized like it's tough. It's just difficult. You got to have some scale. So another option is get remote work.
Yeah.
Develop a remote working skill. There's Starlink. You can work from anywhere in the world. Find a way to contribute content to magazines and websites and things. That's a great way.
Yeah.
Where you're not even sponsored. You don't have to have any logos on your car. You're just getting paid for the content that you produced in your story.
And you have to have the skill to do that, right?
That's right.
In both of our positions running, when I was working for you and then running other magazines, like you still have to have the skill of the photography and the writing. Like
very true.
The world's best story with, photos taken on an iPhone 4 written by whoever that can't write. You're not going to get anywhere with it, right? Like you still have to develop those skills. The remote work thing, I think, is really fascinating. Having something on the road to help sustain, it's kind of like that glide, I would call it. You still have to save and start with some money. There's just no way around that, in my opinion. You have to, if you start with $0 in your account when you're leaving, that's probably not going to work out well for you. It's just a reality. You do need to put the work in to save, I think. But
and people have assets that can work when you're traveling. You can Airbnb or rent your home.
Yeah.
That can be a great tool. You just got to try to spend less on the gear and the truck. Try to maintain as much recurring income as you can.
Yeah.
Find investment vehicles that allow you to maintain a monthly income from that. Rental properties are a great solution for a lot of people.
Or travel by a different means, right? Maybe if your goal is to have a new truck with a camper and a this and a this and a this bolted to it, it may take a long time to get to that. If the goal is travel, buy like a $2,500 Jeep Cherokee XJ and just go, because it's going to make it and it's going to be fine. Or you can go down from there. You buy a motorcycle. Fuel cost is way lower and maintenance cost is lower. And then you can go from there and you can do a bicycle, right?
Yeah, for sure. And lots of people bicycle around the world. I mean, Stefano Melgrati comes to mind, great friend of mine in Italy. I've mentioned him before on the podcast. He's been on the podcast. But he traveled the length of the length of Europe, the length of Africa, the length of the Americas on a Yamaha, little fuel injected 250, and he spent $10,000, not including the bike, to do it.
Yeah.
Now he camped almost every single night, but he averaged about $25 a day, including putting fuel in his bike.
So it can be done.
It can absolutely be done. You just have to make choices.
You're either putting the work in on the front end to have the money to do it the way you want, or you're putting the work in while you're doing the trip, and that can be literally working, or that can be doing it in a more frugal means. But there's always going to be some element of sacrifice to these things, because
that's right.
Our economy is based on an exchange of time for numbers, right? But let's hop to vehicle documentation and temporary import. This is one of the things that I really liked on the book. Is this is such it seems so complex to what documents you need to bring, what it's like to cross borders, and I would even carry this book with me, having done this stuff, just as a reference to kind of have something to go back through. So I'd love to kind of get what's the Scott Brady wisdom on border crossings?
Well, I think that one of the best things to start off with is being organized. Like, just get an expanding file folder, a plastic one preferably, so it can, if something spills or whatever, you don't get your documents wet. And then have everything really organized, including all your copies. So have copies of all your documents. Make sure all your documents are in order. Talk to other travelers who've been through that region recently and ask them what documents they were asked for. That way because I've gotten myself into some trouble because I just didn't know that certain things were required because people hadn't been traveling there recently.
Yeah.
So, talking to other travelers is a really key way to do that. But then you have to make a decision on, are you traveling on a carnet, like in Africa, for example, or are you going to travel on a temporary import? For all of the Americas, you can travel on a temporary import. And it's basically just you get stamped in, your vehicle gets stamped in when you come in the country, and then you got to just very much make sure you stamp that car out on the other side. So normally people get in trouble around vehicle ownership, how the vehicle ownership is identified. Don't start a trip with your earth roamer in the name of your LLC. Make the name of your LLC your name. It should be
pointed advice.
It should be Matt Scott LLC.
Yeah.
Because the guy at the border crossing he's going to have no idea what LLC means.
Yeah.
But he's certainly going to know that it's not
name matches name.
It's not like Earth Roamer Investment or whatever. It's got to match.
Yeah.
And there are places that you flat out won't get into, Peru being one. I got very lucky getting into Peru one time. So, and another time getting into Peru was another problem. So there's lots of countries. Make sure you know, like if you want to take your right-hand drive awesome Land Cruiser from Australia and you want to go take it to Saudi Arabia, you may want to check and see if that's still possible.
Yeah, you can't get it in Costa Rica and...
There's El Salvador.
El Salvador, yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple.
But Costa Rica is really the big one.
It is because it's a block. You can't get through, and you can have them in South America, but you can't ship a right-hand drive into Peru by sea or air.
Interesting.
and also Chile. So you got to know what port you can bring these things in and out of as a right-hand drive. So just do the research up front, and then the documentation becomes easy because you know what you need. You got extra copies of it. Make sure you've got your originals. And don't do any funny business. Like, people do funny business all the time, and they think they're going to get away with it. And sometimes they do, but then other times people get their vehicle impounded, or it becomes a big problem. So there's no reason to do any funny business. That's when you end up having to pay bribes, and it's just bad press. It's bad PR for the next Overlander that's going to come behind you.
It always seems to be like the Land Cruiser guys that bring a 70 series in, and it's clearly a new truck.
Yeah.
And then it's registered as like a 1985,
Right.
BJ 75 or something, and then people lose their minds when people are actually like, this guy reviews cars all day, and this is a car that's sold in his truck. If you pulled up in a brand new F-150 and it was titled as a 1985 F-150.
They're going to know.
They're going to know, like, these aren't, like, where some of these vehicles are a little more exotic to us in the U.S. For whatever reason, it's always been the Land Cruiser guys that have the problems. And I have to say, they're generally, they will cry wolf, but they're always doing, like, and there's a lot of companies with Land Cruisers that do shady, that sell these vehicles as overland trucks. I mean, I'm not going to, like, name names, but there's a couple. And people have had issues. So
just make sure you're above board on that. And here's the crazy thing is, like, anything you can think of, just because of the number of countries I've had to do it. Like, going into Ethiopia, it's the first time ever that someone has checked the engine number.
Yeah.
How many? I mean, hundreds and hundreds of border crossings, and no one has ever. And so I'm crawling around.
Where is this?
On the Grenadier, looking for this engine number, and thank goodness, not only could I was able to find it on the internet where the number was, but thank goodness it matched what was on the paperwork.
Yeah.
Like, holy cow. And like, I should have checked that.
Yeah,
like, lesson for me.
You just don't think of it, though.
Yeah, because no one has ever checked the engine number. But the problem that they're having in Ethiopia is people were bringing in cars, that are maybe just beat up, but the engine's okay. And they pull the engine out, and then the car gets back out under some clapped out motor, and so they're selling them on the black market. They're selling them on the black market. So
just for people reading, a carnet is kind of a good idea,
especially for Africa. It's very efficient.
Yeah, they're cheap for cheap cars, and they're expensive for expensive cars. You're basically putting up a bond of sorts. That is a certain percentage of the vehicle's value that says, if I don't take this out and I don't do what I'm supposed to do, you then get this money. And usually it's not cheap, right?
Yeah, and it can be 400% of the value of the vehicle. So if you're going in there with your Unicat at 1 million euros, you have a 4 million euro bond against that car. Now, probably if someone can afford $1 million Unicat, they can afford a bond like that, but it can be very expensive.
Yeah. So the carnet is always based on the country that you're traveling through, which has the most expensive tariff levied on that
That's right.
vehicle.
Yeah, that's right. That's what sets the.
So that's
bond.
why a lot of travelers don't go to certain places. They
That's
don't
right.
go to Ethiopia.
Right.
But Boomerang, for those in the United States, it has shifted around quite a bit. Boomerang Carnet is now the U.S. issuing authority.
Yep.
It's been about 12 different companies in the last 12 years.
And you can get it through Cars.
Yeah.
Cars.com in the UK. Call them up. They'll get you a carnet on any car, any place in the world. There's lots of good resources out there to get carnets. People think you have to get it from your home country. You don't. It's easier oftentimes. But
so with borders, there's paperwork, there's a process, but patience always prevails.
It does. It really does. And a smile. Just remember, they're trying to do their job. Give them a break.
So I think the most important thing, and the thing I want to end on, something that I think that you do really well, is the importance of being a gracious guest in someone else's country.
Yeah. Well, and these are all things that I've learned the hard way, or I've observed, the angry American, yelling at someone in English that speaks French. and somehow the volume of how they're communicating and slowing.
I
things
didn't
down.
understand you when you weren't yelling at me. Thank you very much.
Exactly. So those are real, and those things are real in the world, and it's a reflection on our country. It's a reflection on other travelers. So we do have a responsibility, and also like we're there by choice.
Mm-hmm.
They are there. They live there. That's their home. I'm this silly guy, on a vacation basically.
Yeah.
And I don't have any leg to stand on to be rude to that person. So I really don't.
I don't think I'm like a mean person, but when I travel in a lot of different places, I often find that American life predisposes you to be a little more isolated. I've learned to talk to people more. I've learned to kind of smile more, to be more friendly, more just to interact more. There's this natural response that I feel a lot of people have, and I know that I certainly do. Somebody comes up to you in a foreign country, they must be trying to sell you something. Literally, in some places, people just are actually friendly. Like, what's this guy doing here? I'm going to be nice to this person. Like, don't forget that that's a possibility. If it is outside of the airport in Mexico,
or you're at a border crossing,
they're
probably
crossing,
trying to sell you something.
Yeah, keep that American attitude. But people are friendly. The world is generally a safe place.
Oh, absolutely. No question. And, just come into it with a little bit of that student's mindset. Come into it with a little bit of innocence and believe in the goodness of others. And it's surprising how be a rational optimist, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So be rational in the way that you behave, but be optimistic that things are going to turn out well. And surprisingly, they usually do.
Well, it's been so cool to discuss, just a fraction of this book. I know this is going to be one of the longest podcasts we've done in a long time, but there's so much of this information in Scott Brady's book, Overlanding 101. I think most bookstores are carrying it. It's on Amazon, so you can, I buy everything on Amazon. You can just go on Amazon right now.
You can get it in a couple hours in Phoenix if you order it, and there's also an audiobook version. So I apologize for our podcast listeners that have to hear my voice yet again, but I was the narrator on the book for the audio version, which is available through Audible and
That's
all
awesome.
of that, which is really fun. So
I'll have to, maybe that'll replace Fraser. I can have Scott.
No,
that'd be a little creepy.
No, that'd be tough. You hear enough of my voice. You hear enough of my
Well,
voice. It was super fun to do it. I'm very honored that Simon & Schuster and Adams Media even considered me for the book.
Yeah.
That they pursued me was a genuine honor, and I'm on a multi-book deal, so let's see what happens next.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely worth reading. Despite all the time that I've spent with you, I still pick things up when I kind of go through a chapter at night. I'm just so happy for you to
Thanks,
release
Matt.
this. And
yeah, you're in there a couple times too.
oh yeah, geez, I've got to that point yet. So, well, thanks everybody for listening to the Overland Journal podcast. Again, you can get this book on Amazon and at most major bookstores. It's called Overlanding 101. But we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks.